Thanks for making it. My name's Antony, I work at Temasek. Put together the crypto investing team. We can now invest in equity, coins, funds, basically the whole lot. I think we're one of the first companies of our type that can do that. Great relationship with Blockdaemon, and we've only just met today. I had to ask these guys what they do. You've got a really interesting panel because these companies kind of compete in one sense and don't in another, because they all have very different solutions. So to set the tone, could I ask you to name your company, your product, and what are your key revenue drivers? How do you make money? Because I think that gives people a sense of where you sit in the space. Who pays you to do what?
Yeah.
You don't have to name any numbers or anything like that. I know yours are huge, all of you. But can we start here, Jen?
Yeah, definitely. Testing. Yes, you guys can hear me. Thanks for coming down, everybody. My name is Zen. I'm one of the co-founders of Web3 Off. And what we do is a little bit more on the SaaS and retail side. So our customers are wallets, and what we do is on wallets as well as applications, we replace seed phrases with a multi-factor MPC key. You can think of it as using your social login, so like Google, Facebook, any of these logins to access a public-private key pair that's still non-custodial and owned by the user.
Okay, so I can have an address, a wallet.
Yeah.
Instead of having a seed phrase or a master key secured by my ledger device or in the guts of my MetaMask somewhere in my browser storage, or written down on a piece of paper, it's kind of scattered across multiple devices. And when I need to sign a transaction, there's some coordination where the transaction goes from one place to another, collecting parts of a signature, and eventually it gets published.
Yeah, you got it. That's basically it. And ultimately, that's also the problem that we're solving. So seed phrases today, for those of you who have played around with MetaMask, Trust Wallet, or any other wallet today, is the standard is seed phrases, where it's literally a public-private key pair. You can think of it as very similar to how we had usernames and passwords. It's a one-factor account in the past. What we're doing is we are introducing OTPs, multi-factor authentication, but just in a non-custodial manner.
So you don't hold anyone's assets. We still hold our own.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Legally so.
Awesome. Now, moving on to the opposite end of the spectrum. You're a qualified custodian based in Hong Kong. Can you share a little bit about the business?
Yeah. Hi. I'm from First Digital Trust. We're a Hong Kong-based custodian, qualified custodian, as Antony mentioned. Fully licensed, dealing with traditional assets, crossing over to the digital asset world. What we do is mainly our clienteles are crypto companies, institutions that wants to get into the crypto space but are not sure how. So we're mainly doing trust, custody, and structuring. Clients are, again, institutional, but we do deal with holding real-world assets for those crypto clients, which is stable coins. We're the reserves for stable coins holding the fiat, and as well as gold bullions and so forth. But some of the products that we're developing now is to help crypto companies because of the challenges they face dealing with financial institutions, payments, even with holding crypto seed keys. We're developing succession planning. So taking a little piece of what we know from our old life and bringing it into the digital asset space.
Awesome, thank you. And before we come to Blockdaemon? Okay, I haven't come across you guys. Just before we touch on the world's biggest node hosting provider. Interesting story here. So Temasek, we've learned how to custody coins, and I had to, as part of this 7-month project, I had to make a decision. Do we want to hold our own coins, manage our own keys, or do we want to give that function to someone else and pay them for it, because they might be better at security than we are, and they can also help with tax and reporting and this and that and the other. Eventually we decided, given that managing your own keys is a kind of new skill set, especially for a very traditional organization who's used to very traditional ways of doing things. It's like, fax me my end of month status report kind of place. We decided to use a qualified custodian, so you are outsourcing that security, but along with that comes a whole bunch of questions answered about your accounting, your tax, and all these things. In a large organization, it really wasn't my decision who we went with. I have all of these departments, and everyone's got their checklist of things that they need doing before they'll approve whatever custodian we onboarded. So I guess your aim is to tick as many of these boxes as possible, so that all the departments can say yes and use you rather than having to like build it themselves or piece it together with other third-party providers.
Yeah, that's correct. Because there's always should be separation of powers, and being qualified custodians, of course, that there's other aspects, factors, which is reporting, dealing with taxation, and crypto. It's not really a standard asset class in audits, in books. So as a trust company, we have two balance sheets. We deal with our own operating balance sheet, and we deal with the client balance sheet. And the client balance sheet where we operate is through a trust accounting standard. And trust accounting standard is not your typical corporate accounting standard that is 12-month calendar date. So we can stretch it out over 24, 36, or even longer. So these will help funds, crypto funds, kind of balance out their own books until such time as, before the tax man comes.
And help them with their reporting and stuff.
Correct.
Maybe one day. So one of the vendors we did look at on the non-custodial side, so where we manage our own keys, was 5blocks. So a very, very large, popular vendor, which I think used to provide the back-end technology to companies like 5blocks and other wallet solutions.
So it's not necessarily slow. So Fireblocks has their own infra, and we have our own infra. We use the same technology and the same algorithms behind the scenes. I would say Fireblocks is a little bit more like, for those of you who know the authentication space in the past, Okta and Auth0. Okta provides more internal asset management. And if you're a hedge fund, you're like a bank, a VC, and you want to hold crypto, that's when you speak to qualified custodians as yourself, Fireblocks, others. For us, it's a little bit more of if you're looking to build a wallet that you want your users to use. If you're looking to, it's more like external authentication or external key management.
Like B2B2C rather than...
Exactly.
Okay. Clear? Awesome. Andrew, Blockdaemon or Daemon? That's the biggest question, the most important question.
Daemon, but whatever. Yeah.
Okay, maybe it's not British or something.
So
what does the business do?
Yeah.
Revenue model in brief.
Yeah, so we do a couple of things. We're the largest blockchain node infrastructure supplier to institutions in the market. So we've got about 65 different protocols we support and the various different node types, full archive, index, etc. across that line of business. And to your point, in terms of like that, we run that business in sort of a cost per node per month, USD. So that's a fiat revenue line.
So if I want to run a node but don't know how to, I pay you money, you run a node for me and make sure it stays up.
And then we'll manage performance, availability, patching, uptime, all of those good things, so that you can just go on and run your business and the node's sitting there.
Any big clients you can name?
So we're fortunate enough to have some of the largest crypto companies as customers and some of the largest financial services customers as customers as well. So good customer here, great customer here, and we've got financial institutions, some of them are on our cap table like JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, Citibank, and across to some of the very largest crypto native companies as well.
And then in terms of security, so these guys are all about key management and like looking at securing the assets. You're more like spinning up nodes that are running. Do you have a security like angle as a product, or does that just come part and parcel? How does that work?
Yeah. So let me just finish our product lines and I'll answer that. So our first product line is nodes, and that's where we started the business about 5 years ago. We then, when the advent of POS staking, we started building out validator nodes for protocols, foundations, L1s. Then we started to white label them to some of the large, well-established crypto funds. And now we run a ton of public validators across about 35 different protocols as our own sort of public shared validators. We run a ton of white label validators for many institutions. That's now moving into more very large traditional companies as well, as you're seeing those entities come into the governance council and validator councils as well. So we do a lot of white label there. That business is all in token. So like basically we just charge percentage reward share generated as well. And then lastly, we've got a suite of APIs, blockchain access, specialist APIs, NFT API, universal multi-chain API, and we have an MPC SDK. And one of the reasons we have that is at the moment, so we're running about 65,000 nodes across about 65 different protocols. Internally, we needed our own key management solution. So we were using a couple of products in the market, but we decided that we were big enough to acquire one just for our own internal use case. And we were fortunate enough to acquire a company from Denmark called Sepio. And also that's in the MPC space as well. But what makes us different is, like, we're an infrastructure and tooling kind of company. So basically it's an SDK. So it's really there for our own internal use. And if some customers really want an MPC SDK only, it's not a service, it's not an offering, it's not a product, it's really just the SDK. Yeah.
Bunch of code.
Bunch of code, like you've got to go build everything on top of it if you wanted to use it. Yeah.
Awesome. I hope that gave a good overview of the different types of companies here. So Sam, your title is Protect Your Gains and Coins. No one's got gains at the moment, it's a bear market. Security, custody and accountability in DeFi winter. So I guess we should talk about, do we want to talk about the bear market, or is that done to death? Does that impact, like, how does that impact your businesses?
Yeah, I'll go after you.
Strangely, it's positive. As the market went down, I think our developer numbers and user numbers went up. I think people realized they had to build something before fundraising, and therefore we had more building happening. So strangely positive.
Yeah. I think for us, because we're at the infrastructure space, so we're actually similar point here as well. But I also think interesting, if you think about staking globally, in Europe and US, it's much more established. And out in APAC, I would say it's just a little bit more nascent. So I think what we saw is this trend on risk on, risk off, that balance change a bit. And so for us, it's been really positive on the staking side, because we've seen people want to get a yield, but be able to sleep at night and not worry about it. It's native token yield. Yes, it's not as high as some of the crazy kind of
LPing into DeFi pools. You're just getting,
yeah. So we actually have seen quite an uptick in large delegations, because people still want to get a yield, but in this market they're not sure if they want to take a really aggressive risk-on strategy. So it's been a really positive market for us on the staking side.
Yeah, for us as well, during this downtime, we've actually been growing quite rapidly. We've expanded our staff. We got tech office being built out in Malaysia. So it's been positive as well for us.
So boring. I hate bear markets, by the way. Everyone's like, oh, I love bear markets, it's a great time to build. I hate bear markets. I wake up every day and I'm poorer than yesterday, like that sucks. What's to like about that? No, great time to build. Okay, so we have an Asian audience. Is everyone Asian from living around here? Okay. Anyone interested? Do you guys have anything interesting to share about? You've talked a little bit about this, Andrew, like the difference between what you do with Asia customers versus the rest of the world. You mentioned staking was more of a thing here. Anyone else got?
Well, historically, less of a thing. To categorize it, we've worked with a lot of large European crypto native and institutions coming into crypto, and they will kind of, to generalize, they'll look at a protocol, they'll study it, they'll do their research, take the time, buy it, and they'll stake it. And that sort of cycle is pretty standard in Europe. So I think what's happening at this point in time is we're seeing more of that, out in Asia as well. Yeah.
No, can you talk a little bit, just earlier you talked about you're one of the few good choices of qualified custodians outside of the US. Can you talk a little bit more about like why someone might choose, what kind of clients are more attracted to outside US custodians versus US custodians, that kind of thing?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of people that really want to stay out of the US tax infrastructure and IRS reporting. I mean, anybody knows investing in the US requires a TIN number. So for us, we want to be able to cater to non-US and clientele, including Americans that are not in the US. So it's a global clientele list that we have. So basically, we offer different services. Of course, we look at the different reporting standards. There's common reporting standards for OECD country residents, and there's also FATCA for Americans. So we have to look at all of those things, and we also consider the different laws, the legal system, which we cater to all three: common law, civil law, and Sharia law. So these are a lot of boring stuff crypto custodians don't really think about, right? So it's kind of the stuff that we focus more on because it's long term. You know, it's about not having the assets, it's about trying to keep your assets in the future, right? We know regulation is here, it's coming, and more is coming, which is an opportunity for us. That's why we're growing, because regulation it's really uncertain, and they can write a lot of new laws, but how do you translate that law to your existing business as institutions, as individuals? So those are things that we try to bridge.
Awesome, thank you. And Zhen, do you like see any regional differences in your client base? Like who's most attracted to your kind of solutions?
I think similar to, so you've got small companies and large companies, and with the smaller companies, they don't really care about legal or anything like that. Their main concern is, I want to build my product, I want to see whether it works, and I want to get users. So there are not many differences with smaller companies across the world. But when you're talking about larger companies, I think we see a lot of the regional differences coming from legal and regulation as well. Our legal compliance is a little bit different from what a custodian would have to go through, naturally, because we actually
non-custodial
exactly. For us, it's more of like telling them like, oh, it's definitely non-custodial. Like we are definitely classified as non-custodial, and therefore not classified under PSA in Singapore, or not classified under like the custodial thing in US or in Korea. And in particular, it's about really putting that fine line there and saying, that clear line, not fine, and saying like, it's non-custodial, we're not classified that. Therefore, liability lives with your users, not with you. Therefore, you have nothing to. You don't have to get these licenses that you. That in particular you provide for your customers. I think that it's, and the change has actually happened as regulation has been catching on. So people have been talking about regulating non-custodial wallets as well, to a larger extent, at least the inputs and outputs when it comes to KYC and AML. This is especially this isn't as strong in the US, there's been talks about it, but it's a bit stronger in Europe as well as in Korea, especially after the Do Kwon stuff. So it's in Korea especially, people are, Luna just happened, so the regulators are pouncing on it, and people are scared. All the big companies are scared. Yeah, and non-custodial sometimes isn't enough at that point. It's just, they want the fire to die down.
Guys, think of some questions, because I'm going to ask another question here, and then I want to hear from you guys, because you're really the end users here. I'm just the facilitator. Okay, let's jump on L1s. I don't think we have enough L1s. We need more layer 1 things. You already support millions of them. What are your are you excited by all these new layer 1s, or has ETH just won it, or how are you thinking about all these different things?
Give us your take on Aptos and this thing.
Okay,
yes.
Excellent. Yeah, so the way we're set up is that Blockdaemon firmly believes in a multi-chain world, and that's prevalent by the chains we support. Internally, though, the way we're structured, we're actually structured by crypto religion. So we've got our Bitcoin team, our Ethereum, Solana team, Polkadot, Cosmos. Right, so and there's quite interesting banter. It's actually fantastic to listen to them all when you're on the protocol chat, and so that I think that tension centralizing some of the expertise into a team is a good way to go about it, because there's very healthy discussions internally as well. I think when I started in January. What I'm wanting to do at Blockdaemon, and we've announced a few things, and there's a few more to come, is making sure that we've got the L1, L2 Oracle ecosystems that matter in APAC represented, like in our portfolio as well. So recently we announced that with WeMade in Korea, we'll be supporting WeMix. We've recently announced support for Polygon. We really like Sota from A-Star. He's a fantastic guy, and we're supporting him and his efforts to be a large part of the Japan ecosystem. So we're really thinking about these things and making sure that we've got relevance and coverage in the ecosystem. How this plays out,
you don't care. You just want as many as possible, and you can support them all for that.
Yeah.
Are you guys seeing anything different? Are there like regional flavors of kind of favorite coins or favorite L1s?
Well, as a custodian, I want as many layer 1 companies out there, because if we can hold it, definitely.
Doesn't it dilute, if you have too many layer 1s and you scatter attention, doesn't that just dilute the whole industry? Because no one could, you make it hard for people to choose. Whereas if you actually see clear winners, people just go out and go pile in on that one, you reduce that choice anxiety.
I don't think we're at that stage of maturity in the ecosystem for that to happen. Yeah.
When mature? Been doing this for 9 years.
40 years.
It's still like the internet in '97, right? Yeah. As it has been for the past 9 years. Sorry, I interrupted.
No, that's right. Yeah.
So you want loads? But do you think if you have fewer, there'll just be more AUM, or do you think scattering over?
Well, it's almost like currency, right? There's strong currencies and there's weak currencies, but in this case, there's.
Who's the pound sterling of crypto?
That's your. Who do you think?
Andy's too diplomatic. You don't have any favorite kids. You're too much of a pro of this.
Equally, and I want more.
Do you support multiple chains, or is it just Ethereum, or?
We also support multiple chains. I think we're all blockchain agnostic here, and and we also all don't pick favorites as well. We love them all.
What's your favorite?
Me, what do I like? Cardano is my favorite. I don't know why. Retail just loves Cardano. I have no idea why it's that good at all. No one in crypto likes it.
Who's buying Cardano?
I'm an XRP maxi. Okay, audience. Did anyone know? Did anyone have any questions for these guys? You've got some pretty interesting.
Just say voices.
Speak loudly.
Yeah, and stand up.
And stand up and say your name and where you're from.
Alright, hi, I'm Jason. I'm from Malaysia, and I'd like to ask a question, to the panel. You mentioned, just now that there's a fine line, of how DeFi and CeFi coexist, right?
Interesting.
Which is basically there's a clear line, not a fine line, a clear line, of how DeFi and CeFi coexist, which is basically one is non-custodial, one is custodial. But do you see that continuing to be the status, for the next 3 years, or can that be something that would actually just prevent people from adopting DeFi eventually?
So, in particular, I think the line between CeFi and DeFi isn't defined by custodiality and non-custodiality of key pairs, in particular. DeFi and CeFi definitely converge. You've got tons of financial institutions and people, CeFi offering DeFi products, and conversely, DeFi also representing CeFi stocks and stuff on the blockchain, and that's conversion from both sides. In particular, public-private key pairs, though. Whilst it doesn't have a direct correlation to what is defined as CeFi and DeFi, to use DeFi, to truly use DeFi, to actually own, what Web3 is all about is actually self-sovereign ownership of financial assets, ownership of your data, ownership of your identity, and non-custodial public-private key pairs are a prerequisite to any of that. You could argue that if we don't have a proliferation, a better widespread adoption and use case of non-custodial public-private key pairs, then everything's still centralized, because ultimately you would have a couple of people still holding all of the assets and a couple of people still holding all of the keys.
Awesome. On the point of Malaysia, guys, your two favorite companies in Web3 are Malaysian. Did you know that?
Yeah.
Which ones?
There's only two.
There's only two. Which ones?
Etherscan and CoinGecko.
Did everyone know that? Etherscan and CoinGecko are both
Yeah.
amazing companies.
Yeah.
Shout out to our friends on board.
Yeah. Let me, I'll link this one as well.
Favorite ones.
And I think, like, from a Blockdaemon perspective, we've talking with institutions a lot, specifically some in the US as well. You know, they've been asking us for regulated DeFi as well. So we've got one example. We've launched a product. We've partnered with Stakewise, my mistake, and we've just helped them build, you know, that sort of AML KYC wrapper around it, and taken it to a permissioned DeFi protocol as well. So for that specific solution, we're actually getting a lot of institutions that really would like to be in DeFi, and their business leader wants to do it, and they're getting external blockers. And so we see it as a good way for them to come in. And some of them may even go further. They might go into full DeFi, they may just stay in a permissioned DeFi state though as well. So we think it's a good way to just keep onboarding like more users and more companies into DeFi.
So permission DeFi being like, I want to whitelist those who I want to trade with, but when I put it on the trade, I'm not actually, I don't necessarily know who it's against, but I just know it's against someone I'm okay with.
Well, yeah, exactly that. You know that it's always going to be against somebody that's gone through exact same processes as you.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's like a dark pool, I guess, in traditional.
Yeah,
But you know everyone's KYC'd.
yeah.
Not random. Okay. Awesome. Any other questions from the floor? I could jam all day. All right. If not, okay. I was at dinner last night with Hanwok and a bunch of other people, and James, someone mentioned that Japan was a sleeping giant when it comes to NFTs. They do all the anime and stuff, but we haven't seen that much like Japanese NFT stuff. So he's like very bullish on the emergence of Japan. Hanwok just created an entity in Japan, so he's probably just shitting that. What are the sleeping giants in Asia that like surprise us? Tell us something interesting. Oh, awesome.
So, Web3 for Singapore. Because applications and wallets integrate us, we see quite a few interesting applications popping up here and there. And in particular, specific in Japan, there's this one. The big problem in Japan has been regulation, right? That's been the biggest one. That's the reason why NFTs are unpopular. That's the reason regulation is quite tight, even at this point in time. And they're thinking about things, but I think it's a little bit tight. But there's this one called Start Trail, and it's an art company. They basically partnered with SPI, which is the #1 auction house. It's like the Christie's or the Sotheby's, but for the art world in Japan. And they're really cool. I mean, they've got like POS systems so that you can scan their pieces of art and see whether it's real. They're really like art people from ground up, and they're building it Japanese based. And it's only in Japan right now. They are in no one's radar, but I think they're really cool.
So cool. Thank you for sharing. That's interesting. Other countries that might surprise me or other people in Asia that you think are interesting for some reason?
There's a lot of emerging right now. We see luxury brands working with NFTs. So we were just in New York, First Digital sponsored a fashion show there. Funny enough, how do you
Custodian
of the
fashion show.
But Vivian Tam, she incorporated NFTs into her design. So Gemini was also sponsoring the event. Half the crowd was crypto people, not only fashion people. But it was really interesting to see the cross between fashion now and NFTs. But we're also seeing a lot of jewelry. Jacob the jeweler, Jacob & Co. We have Ferrari as well. So we're working with some really prominent artists that's dealing with these. So in Asia, I mean, this is really growing. So the usage of NFTs are now kind of switching from just your Bored Apes over to gaming, but also involving in luxury brands, Nike, LV. So they're going into the metaverse, of course, right? So this is where some of the companies we're working with are dealing with us holding the underlying asset, where the physical asset. So in fashion, when they're on the runway, the actual clothing items become couture items that are stored away, so they don't sell those pieces. So what they want to do is NFT those pieces and sell it. And in the future, people can then go back to, New York Fashion Week 2022 and see those pieces that was on the runway.
I always thought that like you'd get traditional fashion houses like Gucci in metaverse, in virtual worlds, going that way, like physical into digital. But what we're seeing is like the digital brands, especially the apes, going onto physical items, right? So you've got like handbags with an ape or stitched onto it. So I thought that kind of wrong way around thing was really interesting for me.
Well, if you buy
it didn't answer my question. I was talking about Asian countries that would surprise me. You talked about fashion in New York to shill your own.
But it was an Asian. It was an Asian designer.
Asian designer. Okay.
Yeah, so Vivian Tam's an Asian designer.
Okay.
I was in India last week, and I think back to our point on which L1s, right? I think there is, countries and cohorts identify with an L1, and I think if you've seen, specific countries like
Korea and Luna.
But let's get back to India. So I'm in India, and if you think about India's pedigree for engineering talent, right? I talk to a lot of Indian institutions, and you can't get into 3 sentences without talking about Polygon.
Yeah.
Consistently, right? They're so proud. And then when I was there, they're just like
Singapore incorporated though.
Yeah.
Indian
Dubai.
Maybe both. They told me Singapore.
Okay. Yeah. And but my point being is, I met with dozens of founders building. And it very much like, India's done fantastically well in SaaS and tooling and infrastructure and building very strong engineering software products. And there's a lot of that thinking combined with like they're just so proud and excited about what Polygon's been able to do. And I just spoke to a ton of founders that are building, this SaaS crypto thing, this kind of, Web3 tooling thing, this kind of abstracted API thing. So I think we're going to see a lot of projects and companies come out of India, specifically probably in the tooling and infrastructure space because there's a pedigree there. But I was just blown away at the momentum that Polygon has given the India market.
Sure. No, good one. Go on. Okay, one more question. Do you guys want to do it, or should we do it? Yeah. Go on.
So within the theme
Got to
of
speak
the
up.
panel.
You've got to say your name and where you're from.
Oh, sorry. I'm Karen from First Digital.
This is a plug. This is definitely a plug.
I'm interested in the Tornado Cash case, where the OFAC is trying to sanction Tornado Cash. But Tornado Cash is a decentralized, immutable smart contract rather than an entity and company. What precedence does this set for the industry, and does it have a sort of detrimental domino effect if the US Treasury wins this?
Well, I think on the legal side, this is not, of course, not good for the industry because it's a DeFi and the government can go in and alter the rules around the smart contract. So we're going to lose a lot of credibility when it comes to people using smart contracts in blockchain. But it also sets a pretty bad precedence for institutions to come in and I guess there's really it's hard for people. I mean, I don't really want to talk too much about it as a regulator.
So this is like there was this thing that code in the US code was speech, and they have freedom of speech and things like that. So the good news is I was reading Twitter this morning or last night. So GitHub have switched on the code again for Tornadoes. So anyone can then copy and paste that code and deploy their own set of smart contracts that performs the same functions as the original Tornado Cash did. Now, just because you set that up, it doesn't necessarily mean it's working. Like, people have to seed it with liquidity, because the whole point in Tornado as a mixer is like you have loads of cash in there and then you draw your own cash out. It's kind of mixed up a bit like putting your keys into the hat. Some of those parties.
It's called a washing machine.
A washing machine. A privacy machine. But so the interesting thing is GitHub owned by Microsoft has switched a US company has switched that back on, which tells me that like the case isn't as strong as it was first perceived. Perhaps it's quite interesting also to see
I
how
think that's
the
a strong indicator, or that's a strong data point.
I think it's good. It's
Microsoft's
good
a
for the
very
industry.
conservative company, right? Yeah.
So that means anyone can copy the code and deploy it in their own solutions on chain. The other thing, I can't remember, we're out of time. There's something also quite interesting. Which I can't remember now.
Tornado cash, privacy.
Tornado cash, privacy, free speech. I don't know. But so that was a good thing. You interrupted my flow. That was a very good data point that Microsoft switched. They GitHub switched the code back on.
So I'm not sure if you guys remember about Virgil Griffith. And
He went to North Korea.
Yeah, he went to North Korea. Yeah. I think it's really sad as well. So long story short, he went to North Korea to just basically do a blockchain conference because they invited him. But then he's a US citizen, and because of that, he was in breach of sanctions. And then he got jailed, and he's still in jail, and it's really sad, just because he went to North Korea just to talk about it, right? I think it's a bit sad. It's like Kantian rights of open source code and like freedom of expression versus like practical legality. Yeah, I mean he's still in jail, so just to bring that up, we should petition.
Here's what I was going to say. So it's interesting how the industry, thank you, it's interesting how the industry dealt with the tornado caching. So some of the companies immediately sanctioned those addresses, even though they weren't instructed to. And that's kind of taking the law into their own hands. So they have the narrative of like, oh, Web3 is for everyone, let's be open. And suddenly, like, even without being instructed to, without naming names, we're like, okay, we do not accept, like, we've decayed these addresses, these tornado cache addresses. The other half of the industry were like, hey, like, we're still okay with it until someone puts a gun to my head and says, you must do this, in which case we will. We're just going to keep allowing it, because actually if you read what OFAC, if you read the text, it's very ambiguous as to like what you must do if you're a certain type of service provider. So I thought it split the industry into basically those who actually cared and those who are pandering to regulators. And like sometimes you got to pander if you're like going the regulatory route. But then it was brave of the other guys who were just like, look, I haven't been told to shut these, to deny these addresses, so I'm going to keep on allowing businesses to do that. And I think also recently it's been made clear that US citizens could withdraw could get their funds out from Tornado without like massive repercussions. So things are softening a bit. It's very heavy-handed, but the things with Microsoft and the clarifications have tilted the needle back towards like, okay, it's not as bad as we thought, or they just don't have a case. Yeah, there we go. Thanks, guys. You've been great.
No, I was just saying, I mean, the whole tornado cache is, bottom line is anti-money laundering, anti-terrorist financing. So that's the whole driver behind it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Antony. You did a great job considering you have short notice to mine.
It's all about these guys. So
Thanks so
round of
much.
applause for these guys.